About a month and a half ago, I joined the AWS Amplify team as a senior developer advocate, and I thought this was a great opportunity to share with you all a tutorial on how to get started building a full stack application with Amplify. So what we're going to do is build this GIF display app here, where you can add a GIF like that and display all of them on the page. We're going to be building this with vanilla JavaScript, so no need to know a framework or anything like that. We're also going to use the Graphql API functionality from AWS Amplify, and we will use Parcel as a bundler. So let's go ahead and dive in. Before we start out, go ahead and install the Amplify CLI. I will link instructions for doing so in the description. Quick note on that is that you will need to have an AWS account and to install Node. Once you're done with that, go ahead and make a directory for this project. Then cd into it. And we're going to go ahead and install Parcel Bundler. You can do this anywhere because we're going to install it globally. So the command for that is npm i-g Parcel Bundler. The I is an alias for install, and the -g installs things globally instead of just locally to a project. Parcel is going to allow us to bundle our front end code, so it's just for development purposes. Now that that's done installing, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to scaffold the files that I need for this project. So I'm going to make index.html. I'm going to make directories for my CSS and my JavaScript. And then I'm going to create a CSS file inside that CSS directory. And a JavaScript file within that source directory. I'm also going to create a Babel config file. We're also going to initialize an Npm project. If you do a --y, then you won't get asked all the questions. If you omit the --y, you'll have to answer all of them. I'm also going to initialize a Git repository. I am going to install AWS Amplify. We're also going to install and save Babel. So save dev is going to save this as a development dependency instead of one that would be used in production. So I'll run that. Then we need to go ahead and configure our Babel RC file. So now your file structure should look something like this, where you have your CSS, you have your source with your script.js, you have your Babel RC, your index.html, and your package and package.lock.json. Those were created for you when you ran npm init. In this Babel RC, we're going to add some boilerplate code. I'm going to copy and paste it in, and in the description bar below, I am going to link a blog post version of this tutorial. So if you want to follow along with all the commands there or copy and paste anything from that, that is perfectly fine. This code here is configuring our Babel transpiler for the latest versions of Chrome. We also need to add a couple of commands in our package.json. So in this script object here, we're going to add two more scripts. Start, which is going to be parcel index.html. This is going to run our file in development. And then build, and this will bundle our application for production. Normally, if you're working on a big application, you will use some sort of scaffolder to generate your starter files. So something like create React app or create Next app or something along those lines. But with this, we need to create them all from scratch. So that's why it took a little bit more configuring. If you just want to clone my configuration down, I'll leave a link down in the description where you can clone my repo. So now that we've got all of our files configured, we're going to go ahead and run Amplify init. This will scaffold an Amplify project for us. I'm going to press enter here. My project will be named Giflify. My environment will be dev. My default text editor is Visual Studio Code. I am building a JavaScript application without a framework. My JavaScript is in the source directory. My built app is going to be in the dist directory, and the build command will be npm run build. Npm run start will be my start command. So all of those options were pre-selected for me. I just pressed enter a bunch of times. Yes, I want to use an AWS profile of a spittle. And it will add a backend for me. So now Amplify is initialized. And we're going to add an API to our application. And we can just do that by Amplify add API. We're going to make a GraphQL API. GraphQL will allow us to run really cool, nice queries on our data. My API will be named Giflify. I will use an API key. I don't really need a description for that API key. And I'll use the default of 7. I do not want to do anything advanced for that GraphQL API. I do not have a GraphQL schema. I want a single object with fields. And I do want to edit the schema now, so I'll do Y for that. And that pops up my text editor with my GraphQL schema. And it has a pre-generated to-do app here. I don't want to build a to-do app though. I'm building a GIF display app. So I will change this to GIF. I want the ID to be there, but instead of a name, I'm going to do alt text. And then instead of description, I'm going to do URL. And I'm going to make that mandatory by putting an exclamation point on there. So if I don't have the exclamation point, a field will be optional, but the exclamation point makes it required. This is the data type of the data in the field. So in this case, my URL will be a string and my alt text will as well. And my ID will be the data type ID. The @model is a directive within Amplify, and that will tell AWS Amplify that we want to add this data to our database. So just like that, we have our data set up. We need to push that data change to Amplify though. So we will run amplify push --y. The --y just makes it so that it answers yes to all the questions, same as npm init --y. So that took a couple minutes to run, but once it did, we have a complete backend for our application. So just like that, with just configuration, we are good to go. Now we get to dive into the code, which in my opinion is the fun part. So we can open our code back up, and you can see that those commands that we ran created a bunch of files for us. So one that's really helpful is my git ignore. So all these things that I don't want to push to GitHub are stored in here. I also have this amplified JSON, which has some information about my Amplify app, and this GraphQL config, which has information about GraphQL. I also have this Amplify folder in here that has configuration information about Amplify. We don't need to worry too much about really any of these files. The one that you'll be most likely to edit is this schema.graphql file, which has the layout for your database right here. We already edited this to make it into a GIF, but if you wanted to change this down the road, you could, and then you would need to re-push it to Amplify. In addition, inside the source directory, we got this GraphQL directory. And this has all of the different queries and mutations. Mutations are for changing our data, queries are for selecting data, and subscriptions in case you wanted to use WebSockets to make your app real-time in the future. So we're going to be using these generated queries and mutations to get and update our data. In addition, you have this AWS exports file. I'm not going to open mine up because it has some secret information in it, but this file has some more configuration information about Amplify that we can use on our front end. So the first piece of code that I'm going to write is just generating my HTML in my index.html file. So I normally do HTML5, enter, and that will scaffold the basics of an HTML document for me. I'm going to change my title to Giflify. And then I'll also add a header here, link my JavaScript file, and also link my CSS file. If you're wondering what these magic commands I am using to write my HTML for me are, I am using Emmet, which is built into VS Code, but is a really amazing tool to learn and makes front-end development way quicker. So I would highly recommend looking into that if you have not used it before. Now I'm going to start up my front-end server that I'm using Parcel to create for me. So if I run npm run start, which is a command that I created here in my package JSON, it runs Parcel on my index.html file. This is going to start up a server for me. Yours will most likely be on localhost 1234, but mine already has something running on that server, so it generated a different number for me. I can go ahead and open that up in my browser of choice, which is Chrome. And this is going to allow me to use import-export syntax in my JavaScript files. It's going to be really helpful for using Amplify and my dependencies within this project. In addition, it gives me a hot reloading development server. So if I wanted to change anything in my HTML, you can see that it live reloads in my browser without me having to refresh the browser or anything like that. One other thing is that when Parcel's running, it creates this .cache directory. I don't want that pushed to GitHub, so I'm going to add it to my gitignore. And you can see that VS Code graded out as a visual indicator that it is in my gitignore. We're going to flip over to our script.js file, which is where we're going to be writing our JavaScript code today. The first thing that I'm going to do is import Amplify. I'm also going to import my AWS config, which is in that AWS exports file. Notice that I have to do the relative path for any file within my own project that I'm writing. Any node modules that I installed for my project, I instead get to just directly import without a file path. I'm also going to run amplify.configure AWS config. This will configure AWS Amplify for my front-end application. So now what we're going to do is we're going to incrementally add some HTML to our index.html file, and then we're going to add the functionality in our JavaScript file once we do that. So the first thing that I want to do is create a form so that I can add a new GIF to my database. So open up your index.html file, and in here, create a form. I'm going to add an ID of create form to it so that I can select it a little bit more easily. I don't need an action on there. I'm going to submit my form through JavaScript. I'll add an H2 to this form to describe what I'm doing, which is creating a new GIF. I'm going to create my first label, and then I'm going to create my input. And I'm going to do the same for my URL. Then I also need a submit button. And you can see that that showed up on the page right there, but it doesn't do anything. I need to go ahead and use JavaScript to implement the functionality for this form. So I need to import more tools from Amplify. So I'm going to import API and GraphQL operation. This is going to allow me to run GraphQL queries on my data and interact with my API. If you look at the mutations file within GraphQL, you can see that there's one mutation for creating a GIF. So I'm going to go ahead and import this into my script file and use it. And I'm going to create a JavaScript function so that when somebody clicks on that form, it is going to create a new GIF in our database. Okay, so I want to fire this create new GIF function on submitting my form. So I'm going to do document.get element by ID create form, and then add an event listener to that for the submit event. And once I do that, I want to call the create new GIF function. First, when this event fires, I want to prevent default, and that's going to prevent my page from refreshing. I am also going to grab the values of each of my form inputs, and I'm going to store those to an object so they'll be easily added to my query. So I'm grabbing the alt text element by its ID, and I'm going to grab the value of that by doing .value on there. I'm also going to grab my URL and somehow this turned into node value. It should have been value. Okay, so now let's go ahead and console log this just to make sure it's doing what we want it to do. So if I open up my console and then type in some values for test and then put a GIF in there and then click create, you can see that my GIF has alt text, which is test, what I typed in there, and the URL, which is what I typed in the URL field. So far it's doing what we need it to do. Now we need to actually store that data to the database by using our GraphQL create GIF query. So this needs to be asynchronous because we are working with an API. So I'm going to add an async onto here. And I'm going to add a try catch block. Since I'm using async await, using a try catch is good practice. So I'm going to go ahead and create a variable for this new GIF that's created. I'm going to make this await the API GraphQL function. So what this is going to do is make an API request to our GraphQL API, and we are going to provide a GraphQL query to this. By doing GraphQL operation, we're going to use that create GIF mutation that we imported. And then we need to provide the data. So again, to walk through this, I'm creating a new variable, new GIF, which is awaiting the results of this API request, which is submitting a GraphQL operation to my GraphQL API. That query is this create GIF mutation. So I'm providing that GIF that's defined on lines 11 through 14 to this query. And if it's successful, I want to console log the new GIF. Otherwise, I want to console log the error. Console error will just console log it in like red. So let's try this out. look at my console, you can see that my data came back. I got a GIF. It had an ID that was automatically provided, an updated at, which was automatically provided as well. Same with created at. And then it has the alt text and the URL, which I provided. So my query worked. Another thing that I want to do is make my form reset once I submit it. So I can do document.get element by ID, create form dot reset. It will set both of those form fields back to blank once I submit the form. And just like that, I have my create functionality done. So now I can create new GIFs using this form. One important note is that in a production application, you would probably want to add authentication, which you can do through AWS Amplify, because you don't really want a random person from the internet to just come onto your application and create a bajillion GIFs. Would not be ideal and would probably rack up some charges there. So just be careful. Okay, so the next thing that we want to do is actually display all the GIFs that we're creating on the page. So we're going to import the list GIF query and run that to populate our page with the GIFs in our database. I'm going to add a HTML element to my page that will be where we insert these GIFs. So if I write in here, add an element with class container, I can use this to contain all my other GIFs. So I'm going to create a function here, get GIFs. So this is again going to be asynchronous because I do an API request. You could also use traditional promises. I just think that the async await is a little bit cleaner, so I've been using that mostly recently. I'm going to select that container element that we just created. I'm going to make a request to get all of our GIFs. And then I'm going to loop through them, and for each one, create an element on the page with that item. I do need to make sure that I am calling this function, so I'll just run it on page load right there. If I run this now, you can see that I get this data back, data list GIFs, and then items. So what I want to do is only get that data list GIFs items. So now when I console log this, I just get the items array instead of all the enclosing information. Now I'll go ahead and map through these items. I'm going to create an image element. I'm going to set the source attribute on there. And I'm going to set that source attribute to be the GIF's URL. I'm also going to set the alt text. And then I need to append that image element to my container. And now you can see that my page loads and automatically adds all my GIFs to the page. Oh, also, I'm getting these GIF links from Giphy. I can click on a GIF and then click on it and then click copy link. And I need to do the GIF link so that it has .gif at the end. But what I will do is paste this in and then say create. And you see that it doesn't add it to the page automatically because right now on that submit event, I just have it adding to the database and console logging it. But if I refresh the page, I now have 2 GIFs on the page. Let's go ahead and go back and fix this. I also added similar code to my create new GIF where I am creating a new image element, setting its source and alt text attributes with the data from the new GIF, and then appending that image to the container. So now my functionality works pretty well. I can create a new GIF and it updates on the page. And when I load the page, a bunch of GIFs load as well. This video is getting pretty long, but I do have a full written tutorial with instructions on how to do update, delete, and I also have a demo on GitHub that shows this with full styling. So if you're interested in either of those, please check them out. I have them linked in the description. If you like more videos like this, please let me know in the comments. Throw a thumbs up on this video if you liked it so that more people can see it, and subscribe to see my next video. Have a great week.